The Orpheum stood at the far end of a street no one seemed to walk down, the kind of place you might pass 100 times and never notice. It had no advertisements, no posters in the window, no digital marquee flashing the latest blockbusters. Just a faded sign above the entrance. The Orpheum. No cinema, no theatre. Just that name, as if it had always existed, waiting. I had never heard of it before I got the job. The listing was simple, almost too simple. Ushers needed, night shift, cash paid, no experience required. It felt more like a trap than a job offer, but I was broke, desperate, and a little reckless. I sent an email, got a response within minutes. Come in tonight, 9 p.m. sharp. Don't be late. That was it. No interview, no contract, just an address. The doors were already open when I arrived, though I never saw anyone open them. Inside, the theatre smelled of dust and old fabric, of something once grand but now long forgotten. Red carpets lined the floors, leading deeper inside. The walls stretched up endlessly, dark wooden panels swallowing the dim glow of antique sconces. The lobby had a ticket booth, but it was empty. A concession stand, but no staff, no customers. Just a single man standing near the velvet ropes. He wore a charcoal grey suit, perfectly pressed, not a wrinkle in sight. His eyes, pale and unblinking, settled on me the moment I entered. Mr. Grayson? His voice was smooth, polite, yet it carried something unnatural, like it had been rehearsed for centuries. I hesitated but nodded. Good, you are on time. He stepped closer, offering me something. A neatly folded black uniform, simple but oddly formal. You will wear this during every shift. It is important to maintain the atmosphere. There was a long pause before that last word. Right, I muttered. So what exactly is it that I do here? His smile was small, almost calculated. Ushering, seating, ensuring the experience remains uninterrupted. Okay, and when does the first movie start? His eyes darkened just for a second. The films begin when they are meant to. You do not need to worry about that. I almost laughed. Kinda hard to usher people if I don't know when they're coming in. You will learn, he said simply. Then, without warning, he turned and walked toward the doors leading into the auditorium. I had no choice but to follow. The first rule was given before I even stepped inside. Never look at the audience directly, Mr. Langley said as we reached the main theatre doors. It was such a bizarre instruction that I almost laughed. What? Why? He didn't answer. He just pushed the doors open. The auditorium was huge. More enormous than it should have been. Too many rows, too many seats. My eyes adjusted slowly, taking in the strange blue glow that came from the massive screen at the front. The seats were filled. I blinked. I hadn't seen anyone enter. The streets outside were empty. No one was in the lobby. And yet hundreds of people sat in perfect silence, staring at the blank screen. Not moving, not whispering, not breathing. A chill crawled up my spine. I turned to Langley, whispering, "Where did they come from?" "That is not your concern," he replied. "Come, your post is here." He led me to the back of the room, beside a set of stairs leading up to the projection booth. "You will stand here during screenings. Ensure no disruptions." His tone remained measured, deliberate. "You may observe the screen, you may observe the room, but you must not look at the audience. Do you understand?" I didn't, not even a little, but I nodded anyway. Mr. Langley adjusted his cuffs. "Good, then let the film begin." The screen flickered. A film reel whirred somewhere behind me. The blue glow shifted, stretching out shadows along the walls. I tried to focus on the movie, but something felt off. The room had too much silence, no rustling, no breathing, no shifting in seats. Just void-like stillness. Then, from the corner of my vision, I saw a head turn. Slowly, unnaturally. I froze. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was breaking under the weirdness of this place. But then another one moved, and another, and another. All of them, in slow succession, turning just slightly, angling their faces toward me. I clenched my fists. Do not look at the audience. That was the rule. I forced my eyes forward, but the feeling of being watched grew heavier. And then I heard it. A voice, just behind me. A whisper, breathing against my ear. You are not supposed to be here. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Spinning around, I expected to see someone. Nothing. I looked to Langley, but he was gone. The voice came again, quieter, closer. Leave before the last reel. Leave before you see. I didn't know what that meant, but something in my gut told me to listen. I turned back to the audience, still frozen in place, still facing forward. Except for one. A man in the front row. He wasn't looking at the screen anymore. He was staring directly at me. His head twisted at an impossible angle, mouth stretched into something that was neither a grin nor a grimace. His eyes, black holes, empty, absorbing. I swallowed hard. Do not look at the audience. I tore my gaze away. The film continued playing. By the time the credits rolled, the audience hadn't moved. No one got up. No one left. I checked the seat count, my hands trembling. Exactly the same number as before. Mr. Langley returned, his expression unreadable. "You did well," he said. I wanted to tell him, "Something isn't right." I wanted to demand answers. But as I turned to the screen, my blood ran cold. The last frame of the film was still frozen there, a grainy black and white image of the auditorium. And in the back corner, where I had been standing, a figure. Tall, shadowed, its head slightly tilted toward me, watching. The marquee outside the Orpheum remained blank, no film titles, no showtimes. Just the dull glow of the old neon letters spelling out a name that felt older than the city itself. The Orpheum. That was all anyone needed to know. I returned the next night, half hoping the place had disappeared, that I'd imagined the entire thing. But the doors stood open, waiting. Like they knew I was coming back. Langley was already inside, dressed as pristine as ever, standing at the entrance of the auditorium, like he had never left. "You returned," he said. I hesitated. "Yeah, You are on time." His voice had no inflection, just finality. "The screening will begin soon." "Right." I swallowed hard. "What movie are we showing tonight?" Langley's gaze flickered to me, something unreadable in his pale, steady eyes. "It does not have a name." I took my post at the back of the auditorium. The seats were already full. Just like last night, just like always. No one spoke, no one arrived. They were just there. Langley stepped into the projection booth. The film reel whirred, and the screen flickered to life, static. The glow washed over the audience, casting their faces in pale, unnatural light, their heads all tilted at the same unnatural angle. Then, the static changed. Something moved on screen. At first, I couldn't tell what I was looking at. The footage was grainy, flickering like an old silent film, the kind that looks too real to be fiction, yet too wrong to be real. A corridor, a long, endless hallway lined with doors. Each door was numbered, but the numbers kept shifting. The camera moved forward as if someone was holding it, stepping deeper into that impossible place. Then a sound. Knocking. Somewhere behind the screen. No, not behind it. Inside it. The audience remained perfectly still. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to breathe evenly. It's just a movie. Just a projection. But then the knocking got louder, closer, and suddenly, one of the doors on the screen opened. A shape stood in the doorway, tall, shadowed, and then the screen went black. The theater fell into absolute silence. And then I heard it. A whisper. Not from the screen. From behind me. "You should not have looked." I spun around. Nothing. Langley was nowhere in sight. The back doors remained shut. The audience still sat motionless. Then something flickered on screen again. My breath caught. It was me, standing at the back of the theater, staring at the screen, the same black and white grain, the same flickering light, a perfect mirror image. Only, it wasn't. Because in the film, I wasn't alone. In the film, something was standing behind me. I saw it before I felt it. A shape, a shadow stretching taller than me, its fingers impossibly long, reaching. My body locked up. I couldn't move, I couldn't turn. I could only watch as, on screen, the thing behind me leaned in and whispered into my ear. The sound didn't come from the screen. It came from my ear. "We see you now." The screen cut to black. I staggered backward, my breath coming in sharp, uneven gasps. The theatre was silent. The audience didn't move. I forced my shaking hands to my sides. Do not look at them. Do not break the rule. Then, in perfect unison, every single head in the theatre turned to face me. Not one at a time, not in slow succession, all at once. My stomach dropped. Do not look. But I already had. Their faces were not human. Some were missing eyes, hollow sockets staring into nothing. Others had mouths that stretched too wide, frozen in something that wasn't quite a grin. One had no face at all. And then they stood up, every seat in perfect synchrony, the audience rising as one. A single thought shot through my mind. I need to get out. I took one step back. They took one step forward. I turned and ran. I didn't stop running until I hit the back doors, slamming into them so hard the breath left my lungs. They wouldn't open. Locked. A sound filled the auditorium, laughter, distorted, inhuman. Too many voices at once. I pounded on the doors. Langley! The laughter got louder. Then, the projection booth door creaked open. Langley stood there, adjusting his tie. The film had ended. So had the laughter. I turned back toward the audience. They were sitting again, perfectly still, perfectly silent, as if they had never moved. Langley's voice was calm, too calm. You broke the rule. My hands were still trembling. What the hell was that? He didn't blink. You looked at them. Yeah, no kidding, I snapped. I turned toward the seats, but the words caught in my throat. The theatre was empty. Every single seat. Empty. I stared. Where did they go? Langley adjusted his cufflinks. They are where they are meant to be. That wasn't an answer. I swallowed hard. And where is that? Langley finally looked at me. You are not ready to know. I should have quit right then and there. I should have walked out and never looked back. But as I turned to leave, I saw it. The screen was still frozen on the last frame. It showed the theatre, the empty seats, and me, standing at the back, and behind me, the shadow. Closer now, reaching. The screen remained frozen. I saw myself, standing there, watching, and behind me, the shadow. Closer, reaching. Langley remained beside me, calm as ever, adjusting his sleeve like nothing had happened. I forced myself to breathe. What is this place? He didn't answer. I turned to him, voice tight. Who are they? The audience. Where did they go? Langley sighed, tilting his head like a teacher disappointed in a slow student. They never leave. His words made my stomach turn. I saw them get up. He smiled. Number, you saw them noticing you. I took a step back. My pulse hammered in my ears. I don't understand. Langley finally met my gaze, his pale eyes reflecting the screen's glow. You will. Then he handed me something, a film reel. The canister was unlabeled. I turned it over in my hands. It was heavy, the edges ice cold against my fingertips. Langley's voice was measured. You must finish your shift. I stared at him. You want me to play this? His face betrayed nothing. It was made for you. My breath caught in my throat. The weight of the reel suddenly felt unbearable. Go, Langley said, already turning toward the empty theatre. The projection booth is waiting. I don't know why I obeyed. Every instinct in me screamed to run, to never come back. But my hands moved on their own, gripping the film reel tighter as I climbed the stairs to the booth. The door creaked as I pushed it open. The room smelled of dust and burnt film. Old reels stacked high against the walls. Some rusted shut, others melted as if exposed to fire. A single projector sat in the center, waiting. I approached it slowly. The machine whirred, its gears shifting as if sensing my presence. Like it was alive. I hesitated, staring at the empty slot where the reel should go. Something felt wrong. Like I wasn't alone in here. The air grew thick, heavy, like I had just stepped into a sealed room with no oxygen. Like something else was breathing beside me. I swallowed hard and locked the reel into place. The machine shuddered, and the screen came to life. The film showed me. Not a past recording, not something from before. It was happening in real time. I stood in the projection booth, just like I was now. I reached for the controls, just like I was now. I turned toward the small window overlooking the empty seats, just like I was now. Then, the door behind me creaked open. My body turned rigid, not in the film. Here. I sucked in a sharp breath. Slowly, I turned my head. The door was still shut. No one was there, but on screen, it had opened. Something moved in the dark hallway. A shape, tall, wrong, too many joints in its limbs, its arms stretching too far. It took one step toward me, then another, and then it stopped. The film flickered. The creature tilted its head, almost curious. And then, it turned its head to look at me. Not the me in the film, the me standing in the booth. It saw me. A shiver crawled up my spine. The air felt thick, charged, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks the sky. I forced my feet to move. The film was still rolling. On screen, the creature remained in the doorway, watching. It didn't move, but something behind it did. The audience. They were standing now, every seat filled, every head turned toward the projection booth, every mouth open in silent, grinning horror. I slammed my hand on the stop button. Nothing happened. I pressed it again, harder. The projector didn't stop. The film kept playing. On screen, the thing in the doorway took another step forward. Closer. I stumbled backward. The film flickered, and then, the me on screen turned around. My breath hitched. The me in the film smiled, a slow, unnatural stretch of lips. Then I heard my own voice whisper from the speakers. "You cannot leave, Elliot." I yanked the film reel free. The machine stuttered, the footage warping, distorting as the image melted away. For a moment, the room fell silent. And then, the theater doors burst open. I bolted down the stairs. The seats were still empty. But something had entered. The air was colder now. The screen was still running. But the film wasn't playing anymore. It was a live feed, a direct broadcast of the theater itself. I looked at the screen. I saw myself, standing at the front, and behind me, a sea of faces. The audience, back in their seats, all at once, every single one of them grinning. I turned. The theater was empty. I didn't understand. I was staring at the screen, seeing them. But when I turned, nothing. My breathing turned shallow. I looked back at the screen. The audience was closer now, filling the front rows. They were watching me. Not the movie, not the screen. My chest clenched. I turned around again, still empty. I was losing my mind. I was seeing things. I forced myself to breathe, to think. What do I do? What do I do? A sound whispered from the speakers, a slow, warped tape distortion, a voice, my voice. Do not turn around again. My pulse stopped. The air was too still, too silent. The kind of silence that isn't empty. The kind of silence that is waiting. My hands shook. I stared straight ahead, my breath coming in sharp gasps. I will not turn around. I squeezed my eyes shut. The silence stretched. And then, the screen flickered. A new image appeared. A single seat, front row, and in it, a man. Dressed in my uniform, head tilted, grinning. My chest tightened, because I knew what the next frame would show, and I knew what I would see when I finally turned around. The next frame flashed. The man in the seat was not me, because I was already standing here, and it was smiling wider. I couldn't stop myself. I turned. The seat was empty. Yet on screen the man sat there, not moving, not blinking, still smiling. I took a slow step forward. Something about the air in the theater had changed. It was thicker now, weighted, as if something unseen had filled the space between every seat, pressing in against me. I swallowed hard. The figure on the screen remained frozen. My own face reflected back at me. But it wasn't me. It was never me. Then something moved. Not on the screen. In the theater. A low creak. A chair shifting just slightly. I turned my head, scanning the rows. Nothing. Empty seats. But I felt it. Something was here. Watching. I took another step. A whisper slithered through the silence, low, breathy, right against my ear. You should sit down, Elliot. My body locked up. The voice had come from the front row. I whipped my head toward the sound. The seat that had been empty before. Someone was in it now. I did not see them sit down. They had simply appeared. A man, face blurred, unclear, like a photograph out of focus. But I could see his grin, that awful, frozen grin, too wide, too knowing. I took a shaky breath. "Who are you?" My voice came out hoarse. The man tilted his head, slowly, in unnatural increments, like a marionette being moved by unseen strings. "You should sit down," he repeated. That whisper, that voice, it sounded almost like mine. I took a step back, and then another seat creaked open. I flinched, because I saw it this time. The chair flipped down, the seat bending under a new weight. But there was nothing there. Empty space. Still, the seat pressed in, like something unseen had just settled into it. More seats creaked, more chairs flipped down, one by one, filling up. I couldn't breathe. The rows were filling. I could hear them, but I couldn't see them. Yet. I turned toward the screen. My blood ran cold. The audience was full. Rows upon rows of figures, dark silhouettes, every seat filled. And they were all watching me. I bolted for the door. I wasn't going to wait. I wasn't going to play this game. I was done. I hit the exit, pushed hard. Nothing. The door didn't budge. I slammed my shoulder against it, panting, locked. A slow chuckle echoed behind me. My pulse spiked. I turned my head. The man in the front row hadn't moved. But his grin was wider now, and he wasn't alone anymore. Rows and rows of figures sat with him now, still, silent, waiting. A single whisper slid through the air. "Sit down, Elliot." The voice came from everywhere, the walls, the screen, the rows of seats, the ground beneath my feet. I squeezed my eyes shut. I wouldn't. I wouldn't let them pull me into this. I turned back to the door, yanked at it. "Please, please, please." Behind me, the whispers swelled. "Sit down. Sit down. Sit down." And then I felt it. A cold breath against the back of my neck. Someone was standing right behind me. I did not turn. I wouldn't look. But I felt it. The breath. The presence. I wasn't alone. Elliot. I gasped. It said my name. A hand gripped my shoulder. My skin turned to ice. Every nerve in my body screamed at me not to turn. But I did. And I saw myself. He was standing right there, in my uniform, my face. But the eyes were wrong, not human. I staggered back. The thing that looked like me smiled. "I've been waiting for you," it whispered. I tried to scream. Nothing came out. It stepped forward, closer. I pressed against the door. The audience leaned forward in unison. Waiting. Watching. Hungry. The thing with my face raised a hand and waved, mocking me. My vision blurred. The air turned electric. The shadows in the theater bent toward me. I had to get out. I had to. A single voice rose above the whispers. "Roll the film." The projector roared to life. The screen flickered. I turned. And I saw myself, sitting in the front row, smiling, waiting. No. I was not in that chair. I was still standing here. I turned back. The thing with my face stepped closer. It reached toward me. The whispers rose to a deafening pitch. The audience leaned forward. The seat in the front row was waiting. The whispering became chanting. "Roll the film. Roll the film. Roll the film." The shadows lunged, and then silence. I gasped, blinking, dizzy. I was standing behind the counter, at the concession stand. The theater was empty. The lights were on. The screen was blank. Mr. Langley was beside me, wiping a glass. He glanced at me, raising an eyebrow. "Something wrong, Elliot?" I opened my mouth. I couldn't speak. I looked around. No audience, no whispers, just an ordinary theater. The floors freshly cleaned, the scent of buttered popcorn in the air. Langley smirked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." My hands were shaking. Had I imagined it? I had been there. I had seen the thing in the seat. I had seen myself. Langley handed me something. I took it, still trembling. A film reel, blank, unlabeled. His voice was calm. "Your next shift starts soon." The film reel in my hands felt heavier than it should have. The metal casing was cool, almost too cold, as if it had been sitting in a freezer. I could feel the weight of something else inside it. Not just film, but something unseen, something that made my stomach twist with an unease I couldn't shake. Langley stood beside me, his expression unreadable. "Your next shift starts soon," he repeated. I swallowed hard. The theatre was empty. The audience was gone. The seats sat in perfect, undisturbed rows, waiting. I looked down at the film reel again. There was no label, no title, no indication of what was inside. But deep down, I already knew. This was my film, the last film. And tonight the Orpheum had reserved a private screening. The projection booth was colder than usual. It shouldn't have been. This room was always warm from the hum of the old equipment, the steady vibration of the reels spinning in the dark. But tonight the air was frigid, thick with something unseen, pressing in against my skin. The projector stood waiting. Dust coated the controls as if no one had used them in years. I hesitated, staring at the reel in my hands. It looked wrong now. The longer I held it, the more it felt like it wasn't metal at all. The surface was soft, pulsing, like something was breathing inside. I didn't want to open it. But my hands moved on their own. The lid came off with a soft click. The film inside was red. Not the dull brown-black of normal reels, a deep, pulsing red, like muscle, like flesh. I recoiled, my stomach twisting. The projector light flickered. Then the theatre doors below creaked open. I wasn't alone anymore. The audience had returned. They entered slowly, silhouettes against the dim lights, moving in complete silence, filing into their seats, row by row, until every chair was filled. I felt my breath catch. This wasn't right. There had been no show times scheduled for tonight, no customers. But they were here, every seat occupied, except for one, the front row, waiting for me. I should have run. I should have left the booth, sprinted out the exit, and never looked back. But my hands were moving again, lifting the red film, feeding it into the projector. The gears clicked into place. The light flickered. The reel began to turn. The screen lit up, and the movie began. The film opened with a static shot. The theatre, this theatre, rows of seats, the empty screen, the flickering lights, and someone standing at the entrance. "Mr." The camera angle shifted, moving closer. I stepped forward on the screen, staring up at my own reflection. Then, in the real theatre, the audience turned their heads toward me. One by one, their necks creaked, their bodies twisted in slow, unnatural movements. But I wasn't there. I was still in the booth. I was still watching. Yet, on screen, I was standing in the front row, looking up, and behind me, a shadow moved. Not on the screen, behind me. I spun around. The booth was empty, but I felt it. Something standing just beyond the light, watching, waiting. I turned back to the screen. On film, my reflection smiled. It shouldn't have. I wasn't smiling. But it was. Teeth too wide, a grin that stretched too far. I felt my stomach drop. Because I recognized that smile. I had seen it before. In the front row, on the man who had never left. A voice whispered, "Your seat is waiting, Elliot." The film flickered. I saw myself step forward. I wasn't moving, but on screen I was. Walking down the aisle, one step, then another, toward the front row, toward the empty seat. No, I wasn't doing this. I wasn't moving. But the film showed it, each frame dragging me closer. My hands clenched the booth railing. I felt something grip my shoulders. Soft hands, cold breath, not human. It's time. The screen pulsed. I took a step forward. I wasn't controlling it. I couldn't stop. My reflection reached the seat. The figure in the film turned to face me. I froze. It wasn't me. Not anymore. Its face was empty. A hollow mask, darkness underneath. It lifted a hand, gestured toward the seat beside it. "Sit down, Elliot." I felt something pulling me forward. The real theatre blurred, the film and reality bleeding together. The audience leaned closer, row by row, smiling, waiting. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The film flickered. The seat was no longer empty. Someone was sitting there now, and it was me. I gasped. I was in the front row. I was in the film. Looking up, trapped. I turned my head. The figure beside me smiled. It looked like Langley. But the eyes, they weren't his. They were watching me. I wasn't Elliot anymore. I was something else. The theatre faded. The static hummed. A new usher entered. taking his first shift, and behind him, the audience turned to watch. The film ended, the lights came up, the seats were empty again, and a new name appeared on the schedule: Welcome to the Orpheum. The lights were still on, the seats were empty, but something was wrong. I was standing in the front row now. I shouldn't have been. A second ago, I had been in the projection booth, watching. Now I was inside the theater, alone. Except I wasn't. Something was still here. Something watching me from the shadows between the seats. Something waiting. Langley's voice came from behind me. "You saw it, didn't you?" I turned. The manager stood at the back of the theater, adjusting his tie, like this was just another shift, like nothing had changed. But I knew the truth. Everything had changed. I shouldn't be here. I tried to speak. My voice was hoarse. My throat felt raw, like I had been screaming. "What? What just happened?" Langley sighed. "Your final screening." He gestured toward the projection booth. I followed his gaze, and my stomach dropped. The booth was still occupied. I was still up there. Another me. Standing at the glass, watching, expression blank, breathing. I took a step back. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. Langley gave me a patient smile. "Come now, Elliot. You already know what the Orpheum is." His voice was calm, almost amused. "You've known for a while, haven't you?" I swallowed hard. My heartbeat pounded against my ribs. "No." "Yes." Langley stepped forward. The theater dimmed. The lights didn't flicker. They dimmed, like something was draining them, draining the color from the air, draining the sound from the room, draining me. I stumbled back toward the rows of seats, but they weren't empty anymore. They were filled again, with audience members who shouldn't be there, silent, motionless, watching, waiting. Langley spread his arms. "Let me show you the truth." The screen lit up. A new film began to play. At first it was just static. Then a flickering image, an old black and white news broadcast. The year 1976. A serious-looking man in a suit spoke into the camera. The Orpheum Cinema, once a beloved landmark, was destroyed in a tragic fire late last night. Authorities have confirmed at least 50 fatalities, though several bodies remain unidentified. The cause of the fire remains unknown, and the building is set for demolition later this month. I stared. My hands clenched the seat in front of me. No, this was wrong. The Orpheum wasn't destroyed. I had been working here for months. I had walked through the lobby. I had taken tickets. I had seen the audience. The film continued. Another news segment. The Orpheum's former employees have declined to comment on the tragic event. Though one man, former Usher Daniel Price, was reported missing shortly before the fire. Investigators believe he may have been inside when the blaze began. Daniel Price. I had seen his name before. The missing Usher, the one who never left, the one who looked exactly like me. The film jumped forward. Another broadcast, another year, then 1991, then 2005. Every few decades, the same story. The Orpheum burns down, the audience inside disappears, and a new Usher goes missing. My stomach twisted. I turned to Langley, my voice shaking. "This isn't real." Langley smiled. "It is the only thing that is real, Elliot." He gestured toward the projection booth again, toward the other me. "You have seen the cycle. You have seen the films. Now you must choose." I turned back to the screen. The film changed. Now it was modern, in color. The footage was grainy, but I recognized it instantly. It was from the security cameras. From tonight, it showed the audience entering the theater, sitting down, one by one, except they weren't people anymore. Their bodies flickered, their faces were empty, shifting, blurring, like they weren't really here, like they were echoes of something long gone, ghosts of a fire that had happened decades ago. I felt my knees weaken. The film wasn't just showing the past, it was showing me. The Orpheum wasn't real. It had never been real. Not since the fire, not since the first Usher was taken. I turned back to Langley. His face was changing. His skin rippled like static. His smile stretched too wide. He stepped forward, and the walls of the theater faded. The seats blurred into shadow. The air became thick, suffocating. The Orpheum was collapsing. Or maybe it was never here at all. Langley's voice whispered, distant and everywhere, "The show must go on, Elliot." I felt something grip my wrist, cold fingers, hands pulling me down, into the seat, into the audience, into the next screening. The lights went out. For a long time there was nothing. Just silence. Then a new usher stepped into the lobby. The cycle began again, and in the front row someone watched, smiling, waiting. The darkness held me. It wasn't empty. It wasn't silent. There were voices, low, whispering, like a distant audience murmur before a show. Except this wasn't a show. This was something else, something I wasn't supposed to understand. I tried to move. I couldn't. I was seated now. A single spotlight flickered overhead. Rows of empty chairs stretched around me in all directions. The Orpheum was gone. Or maybe I was. Langley's voice drifted from somewhere unseen. "You have seen the ending, Elliot. But you must ask yourself, whose ending was it?" I turned my head, or I thought I did. There was no weight to my body anymore. I wasn't sure if I was real, or if I was just another echo. The screen in front of me flickered. A new film began. The title was blank. There was no music, no credits, just a single scene. The camera showed me, not an older version, not a younger version. Me, right now, seated, watching. I lifted my hand, and on screen I lifted my hand too. I exhaled, and on screen I exhaled too. This wasn't a recording. This wasn't a memory. This was live. My voice trembling. "This is impossible." Langley laughed softly. "Do you still believe that, Elliot?" The camera on screen panned. It shifted, moving past me, turning toward the theater doors. Someone was standing there, waiting. Their back was turned to me, but I knew them. I knew the shape of their shoulders, the way their hands curled at their sides, because it was me. I felt something in my chest tighten. The screen crackled. The other me took a step forward, toward the exit. The doors swung open. The Orpheum's lobby stood just beyond, bathed in warm, golden light. I could see the popcorn machine, the flickering neon now showing sign. Like nothing had ever changed, like I had never seen what was behind it all. Langley's voice was gentle. "One of you must leave, Elliot. That has always been the rule." I swallowed. The air around me hummed. Something was pressing down on me, a choice, a weight. I felt my lips move before I even realized I was speaking. "Which one of us is real?" Silence. Then, Langley's smile in the darkness. "Does it matter?" The figure at the doors hesitated. The screen shuddered like an old film reel warping under heat. I watched myself turn, and for the first time, I saw my own face. I looked normal. But my eyes were hollow, not blank, not glowing, just missing, like someone had reached in and taken something that was never supposed to be removed. The screen flickered, the lights dimmed. Langley stepped forward, his voice softer now. "Do you want to leave, Elliot?" I didn't answer. I couldn't, because I realized something horrible. It didn't matter if I wanted to leave. It only mattered which one of me got to. Because there were two of us now. There shouldn't be. But there were. And the Orpheum only needed one usher. The other me stepped forward, past the rows of empty chairs, toward the glowing exit doors. I tried to call out, to stop him. But my voice didn't come. My throat burned like it was full of dust, like I had been sitting here for years, decades, waiting. The film reel spun, the exit doors swung wider, and the other me, the new me, walked through. The moment the doors shut, the screen died. The film snapped. The reel spun faster and faster until it burned out. Darkness crashed over me, like a falling curtain, like the end of a show. And then, silence. Stillness. The first thing I heard was the chime of the lobby bell, then a voice, familiar, calm, professional. "Welcome to the Orpheum. How may I assist you?" I opened my eyes. I was standing behind the counter. The scent of fresh popcorn filled the air. The old neon marquee flickered in the distance. There were customers waiting in line. I smiled. "Enjoy the show," I said. But something was wrong. I knew something was wrong. Because somewhere, deep inside me, I could still hear the projector running. The film never really ended. It never does. Not at the Orpheum. Because the Orpheum isn't just a theatre. It's the film itself. And I'm just another character. Another usher, waiting for the next showing. End of Act 7 and final twist. The cycle continues. Elliot walks out. But is he still Elliot? The Orpheum never closes. The films never stop playing. And someone is always watching.
Do you think Elliot truly escaped? Or was he just another replacement? Comment your theories below. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more terrifying tales.